Sister was laughing when I walked through the door. That's the image I keep coming back to, her standing in the kitchen of the house I bought, holding a glass of wine like she owned the place, because in her mind, she already did. My mom was sitting at the dining table with her hands folded in her lap, not meeting my eyes. My dad was somewhere in the back. I could hear him. This low, exhausted sound, like a man who had been arguing for hours and had simply run out of words. My sister's husband saw me first. He straightened up, set down whatever he'd been holding, and said with this particular kind of confidence that only comes from someone who has never once been held accountable for anything in their life. "You need to leave. This doesn't concern you anymore." I didn't say anything. I just walked past him to the kitchen counter, set my bag down, and pulled out a folder. That's when my sister stopped laughing. I should tell you about the house first. My parents have been married for 52 years. My dad worked in logistics most of his life. Long hours, bad back, the kind of job that grinds you down slowly so you barely notice until one day you're 68 and you can't stand up straight anymore. My mom cleaned houses for other families when we were kids, not because she had to, exactly, but because she wanted us to have things. Piano lessons, field trips, new shoes that actually fit. They never complained. That's the thing about them. They just did what needed to be done, and they didn't make a big production out of it. I'm a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. I've been doing it since I was 26. I'm not rich, but I'm careful with money. My dad used to say that was the only inheritance he ever actually gave me, and I think he meant it as a compliment. I saved for 4 years. I cut back on everything. I moved to a smaller apartment. I picked up freelance work on weekends until my eyes hurt from looking at screens. The property I found was a small cottage-style house about 40 minutes from the coast. Not a mansion. The word mansion would make my dad laugh until he cried. It was 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a yard with 2 old oak trees in it, and a kitchen big enough that my mom could actually move around in it. The previous owners had kept it beautifully. There was a garden already planted along the side fence. There was a reading nook built into the wall of the living room that my mom cried when she saw for the first time. I put it in their names, fully. No caveats, no conditions, no my name on the deed alongside theirs. I wanted it to be theirs, in a way that was clean and whole. The lawyer who handled the transfer asked me twice if I was sure. I said yes, both times. The plan was to surprise them on their anniversary. My sister knew. I told her 6 months before, partly because I was excited and partly because she lives closer to them than I do, and I needed someone to make sure they'd be there that afternoon without tipping them off. She seemed genuinely happy for them. "That's what I keep turning over." She hugged me when I told her. She said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks before I was supposed to drive down. My dad called me, which was unusual on its own. He typically texts, short, functional messages, sometimes just a thumbs-up emoji in response to things I send him. But he called, and when I answered, his voice had that particular flatness that meant he was upset and trying not to show it. "Your sister mentioned something," he said, "about the house." I felt my stomach drop. "What did she say?" "She said you bought it as a family investment, that it wasn't—" He stopped. "She said the plan was for her family to live there eventually, to take care of us." I sat down on my couch and I held the phone very still. "Dad," I said carefully, "that's not what I said. That's not what this is." "I know." But his voice wasn't sure. That was the part that scared me. He sounded like a man trying to believe something he wasn't completely convinced of. I drove down that weekend instead of waiting. My sister wasn't there, which was a relief. I sat with my parents at their kitchen table and I explained everything again. Clearly, slowly, the way I sometimes have to do in project meetings when someone has been given bad information and you need to walk them back to the actual facts without making them feel foolish. My mom listened. My dad nodded. By the end of it, they seemed settled. My mom made coffee and we sat on the back porch until it got dark, and she told me about a cardinal that had been coming to the feeder every morning, and I thought, it's fine. It was just a misunderstanding. My sister got confused, or she misspoke, or she was trying to involve herself in something that made her feel included. I drove home telling myself that. I found out about the listing 11 days before the anniversary. A colleague of mine, someone I'd worked with briefly on a residential project 2 years ago, sent me a message. She said she'd seen a property that looked familiar in the online listings. She thought maybe I'd want to know. I clicked the link. It was my parents' house. The photos were taken from the outside, which told me whoever listed it hadn't actually gotten inside yet. The description was vague. Charming property, motivated seller, priced to move quickly. The asking price was $60,000 below what I paid. Not because it wasn't worth more, because someone wanted it gone fast. The listing agent's contact was a local firm I didn't recognize. I called. The person who answered was polite and professional and completely unhelpful. She said she couldn't discuss the details of the listing without the seller's authorization. I asked who the seller was. She said she wasn't able to share that information. I already knew. I called a lawyer that afternoon, not the one who'd handled the original transfer, a different one, someone a friend had recommended for exactly this kind of situation. She reviewed the deed documents I sent her and called me back within the hour. "You parents are the legal owners," she said. "Whoever listed this property did so without their authorization. That's fraudulent misrepresentation at minimum. Potentially wire fraud if any financial transactions occurred. Can it be stopped?" "Already sent a cease and desist to the listing agency," she said. "The listing should come down within 24 hours. But you should know, whoever did this isn't going to be happy about that." The listing came down in 18 hours. I know because I checked every hour on the hour until it did. I didn't call my sister. I thought about it. I rehearsed the conversation in my head approximately 40 times while I was trying to sleep that night, but every version of it ended the same way, with her crying or yelling or turning it around somehow so that I was the one who had done something wrong, and my parents caught in the middle of it, confused and hurt. I decided to wait, to go down in person on the day I'd already planned and let the facts do the work. What I didn't expect was that she would be there when I arrived. I pulled up to the house around 2 in the afternoon. My sister's car was in the driveway, so was her husband's truck. I sat in my car for a moment, and I took a slow breath, and then I got out. I could hear them before I opened the front door. My sister's husband's voice, raised, carrying the specific tone of someone who believes volume is the same thing as authority. My mom's voice underneath it, quiet and strained. My dad's voice somewhere in the back, cut off mid-sentence. I opened the door. My sister was standing by the kitchen island with a glass of wine. Her husband was in the middle of the living room, facing away from me, in the middle of saying something to my dad, who was standing in the hallway looking small in a way that made my chest tighten. "And if you just sign the paperwork, this whole thing gets handled quietly. No one has to know what?" I said. Everyone turned. My sister's smile went out like a light. Her husband recovered faster. He turned to face me and I saw it on him. That particular calculation, the quick recalibration of a person deciding which version of themselves to deploy. "This is a family conversation," he said, "between people who actually have a stake in this property. I purchased this property," I said. "I'm fairly certain that qualifies. You gifted it." He said the word like it had a smell. "You gave it up. You don't get to come back now and—" "I have the deed documents, the transfer records, and a letter from a real estate attorney in my bag," I said. "Do you want me to go through them here, or would you like a minute?" He looked at my sister. My sister looked at her wine glass. My mom made a sound, not quite a word, just a breath, like something had been released. My sister's husband was not a stupid man, which almost made it worse. Stupid people make mistakes out of carelessness. He had done this carefully. He had approached the listing agent, represented himself as a family member with the owner's authorization, provided documentation. I found out later he had drafted something that looked like a power of attorney, which was the detail that made my lawyer go very still on the phone. He had spent 3 months on this. While I was driving down on weekends to check in on my parents, while I was choosing paint colors for the reading nook because my mom had mentioned she liked sage green, he had been putting together paperwork. I don't know exactly what he told my parents. I think he told them a version of the story in which he was helping, in which my purchasing the house had created some kind of legal complication that he, with his general business acumen and his absolute confidence in his own judgment, was in the process of resolving. My parents are not naive people, but they are people who grew up in a time when a son-in-law's authority in certain matters was not questioned. And they are people who find conflict exhausting. And I think he knew that and used it. I found my dad in the back bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his coat. He looked up when I came in, and I could see on his face the particular exhaustion of someone who has been argued at for hours and doesn't know what to believe. "Dad," I said. I sat down next to him. I need to show you some things. We sat there for 45 minutes. I walked him through every document, the original purchase agreement, the deed in his and my mom's names, the cease and desist letter, the attorney's assessment of what had been attempted. He didn't say much. He looked at each page for a long time. When I was done, he folded his hands on his knees and he said, I told him it wasn't right. I know. He said you'd understand eventually, that you'd be glad later. He shook his head. I told him. My mom appeared in the doorway. She had made tea, which is what my mom does when she doesn't know what else to do. She makes tea, and she brings it to wherever people are, and she sets it down quietly, like an offering. She set a mug on the nightstand beside me. She put her hand on my shoulder for a moment. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. My sister and her husband left about an hour after I arrived. There was a conversation, or something that was shaped like a conversation, the way a storm is shaped like weather. My sister cried. Her husband got loud and then got quiet, which was somehow worse. At some point, he said, This family has never appreciated what I've tried to do for you people. And I thought, there it is. There's the whole thing, in one sentence. My lawyer had already contacted the listing agency's legal team. The fraudulent power of attorney document was being reviewed by the county. I'm not going to tell you what happened after that, because some of it is still ongoing and some of it is not mine to narrate. What I will tell you is that the house is still in my parents' names, and it will stay that way. I changed the locks the following Monday, not as a punishment, or not only as a punishment, as a fact, a practical acknowledgement that certain access needed to be formalized differently now. The anniversary was 3 days after all of this. My parents had known about the house by then, obviously, but I still wanted to mark the day. I brought flowers. My mom likes peonies, which she has mentioned approximately 300 times in my life, and I have never once forgotten. I brought a card that I spent an embarrassing amount of time writing and rewriting in the parking lot of a florist. I also brought a cheesecake because my dad has liked cheesecake since before I was born, and sometimes the simplest things are the right things. My mom answered the door when I knocked. She looked at the flowers, and then she looked at me and she said, very quietly, Come in, sweetheart. We had dinner, the three of us. It was unremarkable in every external sense. Take-out pasta, my dad insisting the portions were too large, my mom rearranging things on the table because she can't help it. But there was something different in the air of the house, something that hadn't been there before. Peace, I think, or the beginning of it. After dinner, my dad walked me through the garden along the side fence. He had been out there in the mornings, he said. He'd figured out what was already planted. He'd been reading about it. There's lavender, he said, like he was reporting important intelligence. I didn't know that's what that was. Are you going to learn to garden? I'm 68 years old, he said. I'm going to learn whatever I want to. I laughed. He laughed. We stood in the garden in the fading light and it felt like something had been restored. Not repaired exactly, because repair implies it was whole before and I'm not sure it was. But restored to something that could grow. My sister texted me 5 weeks later. It was a long message. The kind where you can feel someone drafting and deleting and starting over. The weight of it visible in how precisely the sentences were constructed. She said she hadn't known the full extent of what he'd done. She said she told herself it was just paperwork. She said she was sorry. I read it 3 times. I believed parts of it. I'm still figuring out which parts. I didn't respond that day. I didn't respond for 2 weeks, actually, because I wanted to be sure I was responding from somewhere solid rather than from the immediate, complicated mess of feeling you get when someone who has hurt you says they're sorry. When I did respond, I told her that I heard her, that I needed more time, that I was not ready to pretend the last year hadn't happened, but that I also wasn't willing to write her off permanently because she was my sister, and that meant something even when it was hard. She said, Okay, I'll wait. I don't know where that goes from here. I'm not sure it matters that I know right now. What I think about more than anything else is a moment from that first afternoon. After my sister and her husband had left, after the documents were put away, after my mom's tea had gone cold on the nightstand, my dad stood up and walked to the window of the back bedroom. It looked out over the yard. The 2 oak trees, the garden with the lavender my dad didn't know was lavender yet. He stood there for a long time with his hands in his pockets. Then he said, without turning around, You know, when we were young, your mother and I used to talk about having a place like this someday. When the kids were grown, when things slowed down. He paused. We stopped talking about it. I don't remember when. I didn't say anything. I just stood there with him. I want you to know, he said, still facing the window. I know what you did. I know what it cost you, not just the money. He turned then and he looked at me the way my dad looks at me when he's trying to say something much larger than the words he has. I know. That's what I bought. Not a house, not an asset, not a gesture. I bought my parents the life they stopped letting themselves want because they spent 30 years making sure I could want things instead. And no one. Not a fraudulent document, not a man who thought volume was the same as power. Not anyone was going to take that from them. Some gifts you give once. Some you have to stand in a doorway and defend. I do it again every single time. A boundary isn't a punishment. It's a description of where you end and where someone else's choices begin. It can coexist with love. It can be the thing that makes love possible again after it's been tested. That's not wisdom I had before all of this. It's something I'm still learning, honestly, in the space between my sister's text and whatever comes next, in the Tuesday morning calls with my mom where she tells me about the cardinal and the lavender and whether the reading nook gets good light in the afternoons. It does, she says. The light in the afternoons is exactly right. I've thought a lot about what actually happened here. Not the legal part, not the paperwork, not even the confrontation in that living room. I mean, what actually happened underneath all of it. What series of choices made by real people over real time led to a man standing in a house he didn't buy, telling its owners to get out. My sister's husband didn't wake up one morning and decide to commit fraud. I don't think it works that way. I think it started smaller, a comment here, an assumption there, the slow accumulation of a belief that he was owed something he hadn't earned. And nobody pushed back hard enough, early enough, to interrupt that. Not because they were weak, because they were kind. Because my parents raised people who defaulted toward generosity and away from conflict, and somewhere along the way he mistook that generosity for permission. That's the thing about entitlement. It doesn't announce itself. It grows in the space between what someone wants and what no one has yet said, clearly enough, is not theirs to take. I spent a lot of years being the quiet one, the one who handled things without making a fuss, who kept her head down and saved her money and didn't ask for recognition. I told myself that was strength, and some of it was. But some of it was just not wanting to be difficult, not wanting to be the person who made things uncomfortable by insisting on clarity. What I learned, the hard way, in that back bedroom with my dad sitting on the edge of the bed in his coat, is that clarity is not unkind. Clarity is actually one of the most loving things you can offer someone. My dad said, I told him it wasn't right. He knew. He'd known for a while, but knowing isn't the same as having the documentation in your hands. Having someone sit beside you and walk through every page and say, here is what is true, and here is what was attempted, and here is what is going to happen now. Information is not cold. Sometimes it's the warmest thing in the room. I don't think I'm a particularly brave person. I'm not. I was scared when I pulled up to that house and heard the voices inside. My hands were steady when I set the folder on the counter, but that was discipline, not courage. There's a difference, and I want to be honest about that. Discipline is what you practice until it holds even when courage isn't there yet. What I hope, more than anything, is that my parents felt something shift that afternoon, not just relief. Relief is temporary. I mean something more structural, the understanding that they had not been foolish, that they had not failed at reading people, that they had simply trusted someone who was not trustworthy, and that trust is not a character flaw. It's a capacity. The answer to having it abused is not to stop trusting. It's to get clear about what you're signing, who you're handing things to, and whose voice in the room is actually working on your behalf. My dad is learning to garden. My mom sits in the reading nook in the afternoon light. That's not a small thing. That's everything. And it exists because somebody at some point decided not to stay quiet.